Big Stuff does this thing called the Big Bot Bash, where he invites other makers to create Dada-esque randomly generated robots. I wasn't invited, probably because he's never heard of me, but it sounded fun, so I thought I'd crash the bash. The first step is to roll a 20-sided die for each of the robot's traits. So I rolled 4, that's a googly head, and 20 for a death body, 8 for Knuckledragger arms, another 20, which gives us guns hands, another 8 for evil flavor, delicious, and hey, another 20 for backwards legs. Alright, so now we can bash a bot. Except it's at this point that I realize I wasn't looking at the arrows. I was reading this left to right, like an idiot, when it's clearly meant to be read snake style. That's Bistrophodon for you language nerds. So actually, given the order of my rolls, we have 4, should it be leaking, body, 20, godlike head, still Knuckledragger arms and guns hands, and then who needs legs, and is that meat flavor? Now go bash a bot. A rather different bot. Okay, but actually, first, it occurred to me that this might line up with another horror from The Doomed, Chris McDowall's tabletop skirmish game. It's a very simple and fun skirmish rule set, with a ton of playable scenarios and monsters, which are all described pretty sparsely, like this. The Crusade machine. The only description is relics of the company's rapid expansion, and put to work here since the company first landed. There's a kind of implied setting, but I don't really care about that. I adapt the stuff to my own setting. You actually get more info out of its stat block. It's precise, it has a ranged weapon firing 2 shots, a melee weapon, it's lumbering, so it's slow, but restless and untiring. Seems like it could fit what I rolled. And then it has 4 minions, which are described as mechanical warriors with ranged weapons. And there are also nexuses, which protect it, but also somewhat restrain it. So a little extra work to make all these things. Actually, a lot of extra work. But that's okay. What is this channel but a lot of extra work? Here's some plastic trash, and a Transformers toy, which I'll rip apart for parts. You can get a lot of great shapes from toys, and if they're robot toys, that's some of the work done for you. Some of these pieces come apart easily. Some require force, and some have fasteners you need to deal with. Tiny screws are easy enough, but little metal pins like this are a pain. You have to hammer them out. This is some plastic packaging, who knows from what, but it's a cool shape. I feel like it'll work nicely as a chassis. So I'll cut off the flat part. Okay, here's some styrene sheet and a cap from a medicine bottle. I'll scuff them with a bit of sandpaper so they'll have some tooth that superglue can hold on to. And I sprinkle on some baking soda to get it to cure instantly. Next, some bits of wood and some wheels from the Transformer. And I'll mirror everything on the other side, because these are going to become the 2 tank treads. The wood gives it some structure and ensures that these smaller parts, like the wheels, stick out far enough to more or less match the thickness of the big medicine caps. These little wooden cylinder things will be additional wheels. And we'll get the others from the Transformer on there too. That's good for the basic structure, so here I'll cut out each tread assembly. And trim a few parts. Next, I want a panel to cover up most of the tread wheels, so I'll grab some more styrene sheet and score a shape. Snap it out, make some adjustments, and add some detail. Looks good. Now that I have a shape I like, I'll trace it to make a copy. Nice thing about styrene sheets is you don't really need to cut all the way through them. You can just score them and snap out the shape. The wooden cylinders aren't as tall as the wheels, so to fill that little gap I'll use some thicker styrene, which is a little harder to snap. Looks like that should work. Since this is all styrene, I can use plastic cement to stick them all together. One last adjustment. I want the curves on these to match the big wheels, so they'll go together nicely. Onto the tread assemblies. I've stuck some plastic rings on the caps here so they'll have a lip on the outside, measure the width of the wheel, and cut a strip of card to match it. And that fits. And I'll use this bit of styrene to measure out each individual tread. Looking back on this, I think I could have just left these scored instead of cutting them completely apart, and it would have been quicker and easier to lay out the treads, but whatever. Here I'm just gluing them directly onto the big front wheel, and I glued a thin strip of styrene around the edge of the tread assemblies to act as the base for the rest of the treads. This tread design doesn't really make sense from a practical or realistic perspective, but I'm not going for realism here. It's a fantasy tank. Speaking of which, here's a story about it from the great city of Ozma. It was an era of uncertainty and holy war, and in the Royal College of Artificers, 2 acolytes worked late into the night. An offer from Gelfarr, the Moony Zealot? Zidan snorted. You do know he's only a master because of the church. Aeneas looked up from her workbench. Deserved or not, he is a commission from the king, and is in possession of early culture artifacts. Besides, she smiled, what better time than a lunar crusade to be employed by a Moony Zealot? And what's wrong, pray tell, with your position here under the good Master Melkos? Who? Oh, come now, Aeneas. Zidan, we haven't seen the man in weeks. Does he even know what we're doing here? Zidan sighed and looked about the workshop. It was late, but the moon's light illuminated the room, cluttered with broken automata. You should have seen this place before. You're always saying that. Before what? Before Basa, I suppose. Basa, the master's old assistant? Zidan nodded. It's strange. She got an offer as well, you know. Not from the Moony Zealot. The very same. Aeneas pondered this. All the more reason to go, I suppose. You've always had such good things to say about her. Perhaps we'll work together. Zidan shook his head. You won't find her there. After working in Gelfarr's tower for months, she came back one night. I saw her, tears streaming down her face. She rushed past me, straight to Master Melkos, who took her to his tower. The next day, I asked the master what happened, but he just said it was a private matter, and that he'd called a carriage first thing in the morning to take her home to her family's estate, and that she wouldn't be returning. I didn't press the matter, nor did I have much opportunity to. From that day, Master Melkos scarcely came down to the workshop, and seemed to lose interest in the work we were doing. Aeneas narrowed her eyes. Are you trying to warn me off, Gelfarr? No, that's just what I saw. Seemed you should know. Well, I'll be careful. You? All right. Good night, Zidan. Good night, Aeneas. A week later, Aeneas was across the great courtyard of the Royal College of Artificers, receiving a tour from the magus Gelfarr. She couldn't believe her luck. Gelfarr's workshop was clean, well-kept, organized, and in the center of it sat a true marvel, a great war machine from the early cultures, a hulking behemoth of metal, battle-worn but well-preserved. Gelfarr gently placed his hand on the side of the machine, where a simple white circle was emblazoned. A lunar device, a sacred machine, long dormant. Imagine it rolling once again. Aeneas was impressed by Gelfarr. His tower was an artificer's dream, and despite the lunar symbols he carried on his person, he seemed nothing like the Moony Zealot Zidan painted him as. Indeed, he seemed quite bohemian, open-minded, curious, and kind. He exuded an infectious confidence and enthusiasm that thrilled her. He offered her a princely sum to bring her talents to bear on a project commissioned by the King of Ozma himself. There was, however, one obstacle in need of resolution. It is a delicate situation, you see. Your esteemed employer, the good Master Melkos, developed something of a, shall we say, jealous grudge when I earned the commission of the king. He has already sent one of his own to me as a spy, who stole from me an arcane tome essential to my project. I truly wish to believe that you come here in good faith, but you understand I need proof. And, truth be told, the work I would have you do happens to require the use of that very tome. Aeneas looked out of the window across the courtyard. I see, and I have access to his workshop. You want me to steal the book, then? Not steal, my dear. Return. Discreetly. Returning to her quarters, Aeneas pondered Gelfarr's proposition. Recalling Zidan's tale, certain questions she'd had now found answers. Master Melkos, jealous of Gelfarr's attention from the king, had his assistant Basa pretend to defect and work for Gelfarr, gaining his trust and access to his secrets. An opportunity arose, and Basa stole an important tome, bringing it to Master Melkos. and, seeing Zidan in the workshop, pretended to be distraught, to cast Gelfarr in a dubious light. And once she turned the book over, Melkos sent her away to avoid questioning and reprisal, using her unspecified distress as cover. And as for why Master Melkos had been holed up in his tower, ignoring his acolytes in the workshop, he's been studying the stolen book, of course. She laughed at the revelation and shook her head. One night, she stayed late in the workshop, telling Zidan that she wished to finish dissecting a particular device. Once Zidan had gone, she slipped into Master Melkos's office on the workshop floor, looking for a key or some clue, when, opening a drawer in his desk, there it was, the book. Aeneas paused. She had expected it to be in the private chambers in his tower, that he would be doing something with it, but here it was. Strange, but fortuitous for her. She slipped the book into her bag and left. Never in her life had she received such warm and glowing praise as that which Gelfarr lavished on her upon her return of the book. Blushing, she followed the excited Magus to what would be her new quarters, a small, neat bedroom in his tower, with a single window overlooking the college's courtyard from on high. Opposite her room was a small library and scriptorium where she would work. And work she did. Quite soon she was poring over the book Gelfarr had her take, an ancient tome in an archaic tongue, describing arcane shapes and forms, parts of some otherworldly entity. She would not have been able to make head nor tail of it, were it not for the extensive notes in the margins and loose papers tucked between pages, cleverly elucidating the dense text. Gelfarr had her interpret the text, to design and draw diagrams describing how various types of material could be transformed into the shapes and forms therein described. Gelfarr visited her regularly, always praising her work, and was happy to sit with her and discuss the details of the diagrams she'd drawn. He would then take the completed diagrams down to the workshop and his artificers. Aeneas was happy there, though she felt a twinge of disappointment when he told her that she was not to visit the workshop, that it was important her design work be kept separate from the artificer's implementation. Of course, she snuck down and peeked in anyway, and she was confused by what she saw. Two teams of artificers worked on the Great War Machine, building parallel devices into its chassis. They did not speak with each other, and referenced separate piles of diagrams. She could not tell exactly what they were making, but the devices looked cruel, all hooks and barbs and blades. Before she could take a closer look, she felt a painful, crushing grip on her arm pull her away. It was Gelfarr, with a look on his face like nothing she had seen before. He slapped her across the face, again and again, and roared at her for disobeying him. He sent her to her room and ordered her to continue her work. Shaken, she cradled her face and stumbled silently to her room and did not make the attempt again. Some weeks passed without further incident, and Aeneas lost herself in the work, trying to forget Gelfarr's violent outburst. He visited her less often now, but his kindly demeanor returned as if nothing had happened. At night, she lay in bed, wondering what exactly the artificers were using her diagrams for. What were those devices they were building in the dormant war machine? Why were there two of them? Why were there two sets of diagrams? Who was designing the other one? There must be another book, she concluded. Another assistant must have it, and Gelfarr must be keeping them apart. As she sifted through these thoughts, she idly traced her hand along the wall and felt a stone move. She sat up, lit a candle, and pulled the stone out of the wall. In the hole it left behind, she found a small journal, written in the same hand as the notes in the book. Reading it, she realized this was Basa's journal. This had been her room, and she had been the one to decipher the text. Reading further, she saw that Basa recounted deciphering 2 volumes for Gelfarr. She wrote that Gelfarr believed the pair of books described in some the true form of an angel, a lunar messenger. Basa had had her doubts, but kept them private. After many months, near the end of the journal, Basa celebrated completing her work, amazed, rereading it and trying to visualize the complete form it described in her mind's eye. But in the final entry, her tone changed. "I must destroy the books," she wrote, "but I cannot. It won't let me. It is inside me. Perhaps I can separate them. I must go to Melkos, bring him a volume. Surely he can help. I can only hope." Back to the build. Now, for the Big Bot Bash, you just make one big bot, but since I'd also like to use this for the Doomed, I have some more guys to make. In the Doomed, most of the monsters have smaller critters that cause all kinds of trouble. In the case of the Crusade machine, it has 4 mechanical minions. As with the main monster, these are not described in detail, so it's kind of up to me what they end up looking like. I feel like it'd be fun to have 4 mini-tanks rumbling around and scouting for the big guy. And in the book, they only have ranged attacks, so these can be more traditional big turret on top style tanks without arms or anything. So here I'm using a bit of plastic trash as the base for the body, and shaving down these nubs that stick out the sides so I can glue on little wheels, which came from some old model tank kit. In between the main wheels, I add little ones made from bits of styrene tube, and fill them in with milliput, an epoxy putty used for sculpting. Then I add a couple tiny rivet details. Now I'm scoring these edges to give them some tooth for glue to adhere to, so as to ensure that the top of the body will be securely attached to this base. The top will be made from this keyboard keycap, which was one of the test prints from my KB1 video, where I made a set of keys for a keyboard inspired by Teenage Engineering's OP1 synth, and some more milliput to fill this gap. So that old tank kit I mentioned has these cool flexible treads, perfect for a teeny tiny baby tank. I just need to glue them on and cut them down to size. But this brings up a problem. I need to make 4 of these little guys, and I just don't have enough parts for that. I don't even have enough of this tank tread for 2 tanks. Also, it would be so boring just to make this same thing 3 more times. So, I'm gonna dip a toe into making molds and cast copies of this guy. I have no equipment for this, but a bit of research has led me to believe that it's possible, at least, if I take certain steps and use an appropriate silicone and plastic resin. On the back, some greeblies. This box thing came from a World War II jerry can kit. Another bit of styrene tube, and some putty I rolled will make a great greebly down here. Nice. Next I'll use some thick styrene to fill in the bottom a bit. And of course we've got to have some cables. I add a little bit more detail on the underside, but it winds up getting covered up later because of the mold process. Okay, now for some paneling on the back, just to add a touch more techie texture. And one more tiny bit. Yeah, that's looking nice. And then for the top of this tube thing, I don't know what this is, but I think it came with some sci-fi minis I got a while back. And a couple of tiny pipes here. I'll make cables come out of them later. And some little tread covers from some kit. Back to the big guy with another little greebly. I think it's another Gundam bit, and it'll go on top of the body. For the back of the tread covers, I'll use another bit of styrene. And these plastic packaging shapes might look nice on the front of the bot if I give them a little trim. Yeah, kind of like pedipalps. I want to bulk out this body a bit, and I'll just keep using foam for that. I've got plenty of scraps, and foam is great for bulking out rough shapes. Next, I carve it a bit to match the shape of the plastic above. Nothing too fancy, most of this will get covered up. As usual, I'm kind of just winging this as I go, making sure to step back and look at what I've done and where I might be able to go next. So at this point, I line up one of the tread assemblies against the foam on the side of the body, and cut out a chunk so the assembly can slot in there. Same on the other side. And here's a test fit. Looks pretty good to me. So it's time to glue it up. Alright, so there's the who needs legs done. Don't need legs if you've got treads. Now to get started on the face, which is another bit from some kit. It has this little hole on the top which I can fill with hot glue and stick a few strands of green stuff into. Whenever I use green stuff, I wind up with some extra, which I usually roll out into thin cables like this. It's flexible when it cures, so these wind up being really useful. And if I'm feeling extra ambitious, I'll use the Roll Maker, which is a tool for making textured putty cables. You can see a few of these have little ridges. That's from the Roll Maker. Cables make for great mechanical details, even if you wouldn't really want them on the exterior of your tank. Another little panel up here. And more cable routing down the side. Trim that. Doubling up cable routing often looks quite nice. And for this last one, I'll stick it in here for now. Okay, this is DOS air dry clay, which I'm going to start using to make the "is that meat" flavor of the bot. And also the "should it be leaking" part, in the sense that some kind of meaty interior is leaking out of the metal chassis. Maybe some fluids too. I'm filling in this flimsy plastic area here so it'll be nice and solid. DOS isn't great for detail, but it is nice for quickly bulking things out. And when making a biomechanical bot, having big meaty areas like this can really help fill gaps you're not sure what to do with. Or even entire areas of the bot you don't really want to add a whole bunch of paneling and detail to, like the undercarriage here, which won't be very visible anyway. Okay, while I add some more details, let's get back to the story. Aeneas had been trying to stay in Gelfarr's good graces, but her discovery of Basa's journal unsettled her. She had a vague sense Gelfarr wanted her to stay in his tower until the work was done, but she hadn't been explicitly forbidden from leaving. So she slipped out one night and found Zidan. They sat on a stone bench in the arched arcades surrounding the college's courtyard. Aeneas told Zidan that the work she'd been doing for Gelfarr had been fascinating and strange, and Gelfarr himself was mostly quite charming and encouraging, though he did seem to have quite a temper. She did not mention her theft of the book, but she did say that Gelfarr told her that Melkos was jealous of him, and that he had sent Basa as an agent to sabotage his work. Zidan scoffed at this, saying Master Melkos was tremendously accomplished, and if anything, Gelfarr should be jealous of him. Besides, he knew Basa, and she had been genuinely intrigued by Gelfarr's offer, and Melkos had practically begged her not to go. Aeneas nodded, and then mentioned the journal, in that it had led her to believe she was now working on the same project Basa had been, and that the journal ended with Basa mentioning bringing something of Gelfarr's back to Master Melkos for safekeeping. Maybe not on Melkos's orders, but she seemed to think it was dangerous, and that Melkos could help her somehow. Aeneas saw Zidan suddenly tense up, and she fell silent. Following his gaze across the courtyard, she saw Gelfarr walking briskly towards them in the moon's light. Slowing his pace, he walked calmly over to them, introducing himself to Zidan with a broad smile. "Ah, so this is Zidan. My former acolyte Basa had so many lovely things to say about you." Aeneas felt his powerful grip on her shoulder. "Aeneas, I am sorry to interrupt, but you are needed, urgently, at the tower. Come along." He tugged at her. "May the moons light your way, Zidan. Give my best to the good master." Zidan nodded, but said nothing, watching as Gelfarr led Aeneas back to his tower. Once inside, Gelfarr locked the door and threw Aeneas to the floor, kicking her viciously and shouting that she was a spy for Master Melkos. She cried out that she was not, that she and Zidan were friends, that Melkos had nothing to do with their meeting. He screamed in her face that she was an idiot, an absolute imbecile, if she believed that. Zidan was an agent of Melkos. He was using her to get information from him. Dragging her roughly up to her room, Gelfarr told her that she had shown this night that she could not be trusted to have the run of the tower. She would, from that point on, be forbidden from leaving her floor, from speaking with outsiders. Guards would be posted, and she would receive half rations. But once they entered her room, Gelfarr's tone quickly changed. He sat her down gently on the bed and knelt beside her, tending the wounds he had given her mere moments ago. Tutting as if she were a child who had fallen out of a tree he had warned her not to climb. "My dear Aeneas, it is ever so challenging to shepherd the weak-willed along the moonslit path. You place a great burden upon me with your actions. I'm afraid you must be protected from yourself." He paused a moment, then continued. "I don't know why I look after you so, when you make my life so difficult. No other master artificer would be so forgiving. You know your old master Melkos tossed Basa aside like an oily rag after she did his dirty work. This is the only chance you will ever get to be a part of something so important." He finished applying a poultice to her forehead and gave her a beatific smile. "I see the potential in you, Aeneas, to do great things, and yet you would squander it with your stupidity. So let me state this plainly. This is where you must be, finishing our great work." For weeks thereafter, Aeneas toiled away in total solitude, accepting the lunar guard who brought her half rations and took away the completed diagrams, refusing to speak even a word to her. Until finally, as the seasons changed and the air began to cool, she completed the final diagram, unsure what would come next. The guard left her a full ration that day, taking the diagram, her notes, and the book as he left. For days she heard nothing, received no new assignment, and did not see Gelfarr except once out of the single window in her bedroom high above the College of Artificers. He was walking in the courtyard with another young acolyte, who she vaguely remembered meeting when she first arrived here, Farah, a pretty, waifish, timid girl who hadn't left much of an impression on her. She'd heard she'd gone to work for Gelfarr, but hadn't given it any thought until then. And there she was, hand on Gelfarr's arm, and in her other hand, was that the book? Perhaps it was the other volume, and Farah the other diagrammist. Languishing in her chamber for days more, she finally received a visitor. An odd, bird-like automaton landed on her windowsill. She approached it slowly and gingerly touched it. A hatch in its body popped open, revealing a document within. Unfurling it, she saw it was from Zidan and Basa. Back to the build. Now the little tank is going to get a turret on top, so I'm going to build one out of styrene. I'm cutting up bits of a square styrene tube here, which this round styrene tube happens to fit perfectly inside of. So I'll glue them up, and the round tube will be our barrel. Next up, I'm cutting really thin styrene sheet into a nice shape for a panel on top, which goes on with CA glue. Now I'm cutting up some more model tank bits, I think, for the sides of the turret. These little semi-cylinder things, plus some very tiny pipes. Looking good. Next I'll add some bulk to the bottom of the turret with this thick styrene. It just needs a little trimming to get a nice angle on there. And on it goes. The back of the turret is open, so I want to plug that up, and maybe get a touch more paneling detail. And then a little cleanup. And onto the really tiny details. It'll get mounted here on top of this piece, which I think was originally a wheel from some kit. It has this nice little peg sticking up, and with an equivalent wheel bit, I can put a hole in the bottom of the turret. And it fits. That's pretty neat. The turret needs one last little detail because the pipes on the sides don't go anywhere, which looks weird. So this little plastic washer with a few cuts and adjustments will solve that problem. And there it is. Okay, actually I want a few more details on there. Just some rivets and paneling. These little shapes will go on the sides where there's some open space, and then this little strip goes on top. And that's the turret. Alright, so we got the meat leaking out of the big guy. Now we can look into the Knuckledragger arms and gun hands parts of the prompt. So I'll make a bit of armature here, twisting some wire for an arm, and shaping the ends of the wire into little fingers, which also get a few twists with the pliers. I wrap any loose wire around the hand, and that's an arm armature done. Then I make another arm to match. It's the same process. These are going to be reaching out from the underbelly of the bot, low to the ground, knuckles dragging. I trim the excess wire, and that's another arm. Now they need some meat. Once again, I'll be using DOS air dry clay for this. I've decided these arms will drag out the back. Maybe they're actually vestigial legs. So while their clay flesh dries, I'll make some new armatures for the front arms. DOS clay isn't great at sticking to things, so I've found that kneading a bit of PVA glue into it can really help. It gets extra messy, but also quite a bit easier to work with. Next, the little styrene tubes coming out of the middle of the palms, and that's gun hands. Even with the PVA glue trick, the fingers are a little small for DOS clay, so I do those with green stuff, which is both very sticky and can hold fine detail. I'm using some sculpting tools from Bee's Putty to help shape it. And then I use a thin layer of green stuff over the DOS clay on the arms to act as a kind of skin. A little dab of petroleum jelly can help smooth everything out and keep the green stuff from sticking to your fingers too much. And that's all our freaky little arms and or legs. Let's get some texture on these treads. These are just really thin styrene strips. I'm adding 2 to each tread to give them a little extra detail. I don't bother with the treads on the underside because those will be covered in dirt and grime. And actually even the ones on top will get quite a bit of gunk, which is why I'm not worried about adding a ton of detail to them. This guy's going to have a lot of cables and tubes connecting the mechanical to the meat. This is just a process of finding interesting places and stringing green stuff cables between them. I generally prefer these to actual wire because they tend to be just the right amount of flexible without being prone to kinks. Not to kink shame. Speaking of which, here's a butt tube. Back to the story. Alone and lacking much of anything to do for Master Melkos, Zidan had become bored and restless. He thought frequently about his nighttime meeting with Aeneas, and what she'd told him about Basa. He began investigating. He wrote to Basa's family's estate, asking after her, and curiously received his own letter back with a note that he should instead write her at her current residence at the College of Artificers. Upon receiving this reply, Zidan began tampering with the locks on the door leading to Master Melkos' private chambers, high in his tower. Finally unlocking them, he worked up his courage and slipped inside. Slowly and silently climbing the spiral stairs, he heard voices, which was very strange. He knew Master Melkos lived alone. As he crept higher, the voices became clearer. One was Melkos, as expected. The other was Basa. The first utterance Zidan heard clearly was Master Melkos saying, "Every day I tell you the same thing. This will help you. You will be free. Do you understand?" Basa, voice weak, replied, "Master, no. It will be free. Stop this madness, I beg you. This is not the way. You cannot control it." Melkos growled, "You know this must happen, one way or another. You are making this needlessly difficult. You are making me do this." Then a hum and crack of energy, and silence. Zidan tried to steady his shaking on the steps, tried to process what he'd just heard. Then Basa spoke again, but her voice was changed, flat, emotionless, low, and she spoke of something strange and arcane that Zidan did not understand. A quill scratched against parchment. Whatever Melkos was forcing Basa to recite, he was surely occupied recording it. Now was the time to continue exploring. In the tower's rooms, Zidan found numerous half-built automata taking strange, twisted forms, the like of which he had never seen before. Across the walls and floor were strewn notes and designs for even more intricate, impossible machines, the work of a genius or a madman. Zidan then came across a bedroom with the door ajar and slipped inside. It was small and spare. Thinking this was the room Melkos was holding Basa in, he searched it, looking for what exactly. He wasn't sure. Then he froze, listening. Footsteps approached. He slipped into a large, mostly empty chest and lowered the lid, just as Melkos walked a stumbling, dazed Basa into the room and lay her down on the bed, tying her arms to the posts. He stood back, looking down at her for a moment, then left the room, locking the door behind him. Once he'd been gone for a while, Zidan crept out of the chest and approached the sleeping form on the bed. He hovered his hand over her mouth in case she screamed, and woke her. Her eyes shot open, but she made no sound. She stared blankly at him, and then a look of recognition and of confusion spread across her face. "Zidan," she whispered, "is that you? Are you here to get me out? Please tell me this isn't a dream." "It is me, and this is no dream," he said, untying her wrists. "But I did not even know you were here until this very night. They said you'd left the college, returned home. I became suspicious, so I snuck into the Master's tower, and, well, here you are. What is happening here? What is he doing to you?" She seemed to still be dazed and distracted, seeing something in the darkness that he could not, but she told him, as best she could, her story. Which we'll get into after we talk a bit more about the build. This little guy gets a few more details, ranging from little panels to some careful cable routing, going all the way around to the front. And doubling up the cable, as usual, looks quite nice, especially if they're different thicknesses. This thin cable gets plugged into whatever this little box is. It's delicate work. And a few more panels and greeblies. Spend enough time making little guys like this, and you'll hear the word greebly a lot. A greebly is a little doodad you stick to a model to add visual detail and a sense of scale, especially if they come from plastic model kits. The term comes from Industrial Light and Magic, back in the 70s when they were making physical spaceship models for Star Wars. And that's pretty much the full little guy. Okay, so I've basically built the big bot, the Crusade machine, and the little one, the minion. That leaves the Nexuses. In the Doomed, most horrors have 3 Nexuses, which are just things that must be destroyed before the horror can be fully taken out. They're kind of like its source of power, but they're framed differently, narratively, depending on the horror. For the one I made in a previous video, the Devourer, the Nexuses were these big heaps of meat that grew out of the ground. For this one, the Nexuses follow the Crusade machine around, and it gets more vulnerable but also faster as players destroy them. So I think of them as little automated shield generators that the Crusade machine powers wirelessly. And as they get destroyed, its shields weaken, but it also has less drain on its energy, so it can move more freely. So, with a bunch of Gundam and toy bits, I quickly put this little guy together and filled the gaps with a mix of green stuff and milliput. You can mix different epoxy putties to combine or alter their properties. Green stuff plus milliput has much of the stickiness and plasticity of green stuff, plus some of the workability of milliput. And it cures harder than green stuff, which makes it more sandable. And I get some very tiny rivets on there too. Okay, one last little extra thing I made. This antenna thing was part of an ill-conceived plan to have a single elaborate mold for everything. The idea was part of the sprue connecting the parts would be repurposed as a terrain piece, inspired by a miscast video about making molds. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and I wasted a bunch of silicone on a bad mold. So I wind up just turning this into a separate piece. This is mostly just Gundam bits, cut up plastic packaging, and tiny bits of styrene. I won't go into the failed mold too much, except to say that you shouldn't overcomplicate things if you don't absolutely need to. Especially in my situation, where I haven't done this before, I don't have a vacuum chamber, I'm not making a production run, I just need a few copies of a couple models. In the end, making a bunch of smaller, simpler, separate molds wound up being the way to go. And I was able to cut up and reuse a bunch of the silicone from the failed mold for the new ones. So it wasn't a total waste of silicone, plus I got some experience mold making. Speaking of mold making, here are some special considerations you need to take when making models that you want to mold and cast. Especially if, like me, you're inexperienced and have no equipment. The main thing is that you're going to have to cover your model with silicone to make the mold, which means that silicone is going to creep into every nook and cranny that it can. This is, of course, how it captures all the details, but if you leave big gaps and holes in the model, it'll faithfully capture those too. This can be a problem when you're trying to pull the model or casts out of the mold. If silicone gets caught in some deep crevice, you might tear it or break the cast trying to get it out. Also, any super narrow or pointy bits of the model will create areas of the mold where air bubbles are likely to get trapped, which will create holes in the castings. And finally, any loops or bridges in the model will get the silicone caught, and you'll need to cut it to get the model out. There's a whole art to this, and I'm just figuring it out as I go. At this point, I've decided to go the simple route and make a separate mold for each piece. I want to create some flat surface area on the bottoms of the pieces, so that I'll have a decently large hole that I can pour resin into and air can escape from, and so I can pull the casting out of it when it's cured. So to make the silicone molds, I use cardboard and hot glue. I put a dab of glue down to stick the bottom of the piece to the cardboard, and then glue in some cardboard walls, making sure to seal all the gaps with hot glue so the silicone doesn't leak out. I hit the inside seams too so that it doesn't seep into the corrugation. For the Nexus, I stick it onto a base before putting it in so that it'll be easier to pour the resin. To make the molds, I'm using a low viscosity silicone from Smooth On. It's called Mold Max 29NV, no vacuum. So in theory, you don't need a vacuum chamber to get good results with this stuff. You do, however, need a scale, because you mix the two parts by weight. Then you gotta stir it until it's an even color throughout. Its pot life is 40 minutes, so it's not too much of a rush. Then, from as much height as you can manage, pour a thin, continuous stream into the mold and let it spread out on its own until the pieces are fully covered. So, I give my failed mold a new lease on life by cutting it up into little chunks and dropping them into these while they're still wet to help fill them up. Especially in the case of my Nexus mold, I was a little stingy with the silicone, so it needed a bunch of filler to completely cover the piece. Fortunately, these pieces bond seamlessly with the curing silicone. After everything cures, I tear the molds out of the boxes and start cleaning up the holes where I'll be pouring the resin and pulling the pieces out. Once those are big enough and in a good shape, I pull out the original. For this one, you can see there are 2 holes instead of just 1, so I cut across the little silicone bridge to join them. Now, with a little work, I can pull the piece out. And then, finally, I trim and clean up the molds because it's nice when your things are nice. It's tempting to try and use them immediately, but they actually need to sit in off-gas for a few hours, or they can mess with the curing process while casting. You can speed this up by heating and drying them a bit. Since I have a 3D printer, I just toss these in my filament dryer on low heat for a while, and that seemed to do the trick. When that's all done, we can finally cast some guys. I'm casting these in a plastic resin, also from Smooth On, called Smooth Cast 300. It's also low viscosity and good for casting without a vacuum chamber. The low viscosity means it'll flow into tight spaces and bubbles will dissipate more easily, which is good because this stuff cures very quickly, so there's not a lot of time for bubbles to rise and pop. It also means you have to mix and pour it fast. Popping some bubbles here, and I have a little extra, so I'll pour it into a push mold of some skulls and let it cure. The larger pieces actually cure faster than the smaller ones. Once they're done, I'll pull them out. You can see there was a bubble in the barrel here, but I can fill that in with putty. Otherwise, the turret looks good. The tank's a little harder to get out, but it looks pretty good too. Still a few imperfections here and there, but again, nothing some putty can't fix. The Nexus casting also goes really well. A few minor imperfections, but no big deal. The bottoms all need a little touching up, which is just an artifact of the mold process. and I mix up some epoxy putty to fill gaps and bubbles. Plus the turrets need to get drilled out so they can sit on the tanks properly. So here's our original little guy and all the clones. Pretty cool. And here's all the Nexuses. Look at them go. Vroom. And the Nexuses all get bases. Next, the big bot needs more details. I use coffee grounds for dirt, little punched out bits of pewter for rivets, and thin stretched out green stuff for skin. So while I do that, back to the story. Back when Basa had been working with Zidan in Master Melkos's workshop, she'd been deciphering ancient texts in a quest to create a truly autonomous automaton. Gelfarr, a lunar priest, had recently arrived at the college with much fanfare. He had been appointed by the King of Ozma to one of the Great Master's towers. An unusual act, but at the height of the Lunar Crusade, it met little resistance. It was rumored he had arrived with some great and ancient relics and special dispensation to access highly restricted texts, working under the utmost secrecy on some project crucial to the Crusade. Gelfarr came to Basa one day, offering a position in his tower, as he had come upon a very important arcane text that needed deciphering. The nature of the text was like nothing she'd ever encountered, a 2-volume set of tomes describing the true shape of a lunar angel. At least, that's what Gelfarr believed. Basa accepted the offer, intrigued by this strange and prestigious project. She began her work, deciphering the 2 books. They certainly described some kind of entity that took some kind of intricate and complex form. It was difficult but rewarding work that took her many months to complete. As she finished her great task, she kept reviewing her work in her mind, visualizing how all the parts fit together, how they combined to create a single form. Eventually, it coalesced in her mind, and she gasped as she saw it in its totality. A beautiful, terrible shape, subtle and intricate, irregular yet somehow perfect. And then, the shape in her mind moved, of its own will. Startled, Basa tried to think of something else, but could not. She kept imagining the shape, and the shape kept growing in her mind, pushing out other thoughts. As it pressed against the edges of her mind, she nearly forgot who she was, her own name. Terrified, she fought back against it, clawing back bits of her mind from the edge of madness, and wondered what Gelfarr could want this horrible thing for. He was so wrong about its nature. And now, it was inside her. She tried to destroy the books, but the thing in the shape in her mind would not let her. She thought she could at least separate them, so that no one else could gain the full knowledge she was now cursed with. Basa took one of the books and snuck out that night, going to her former mentor, Melkos, as the thing in the shape strained against the confines of her mind. She confided in Melkos, gave him the book, and begged him to destroy or hide it. Master Melkos comforted his former acolyte and asked how Gelfarr had planned to use this information she'd deciphered. Given how the entity occupied the shape when it resolved in her mind, she believed there was a powerful semiotic magic at work. The entity, once signified, became its sign. She feared Gelfarr would try to recreate what she had done in her mind in the physical world. Master Melkos looked shocked. Basa took this as a sign she had done the right thing in going to him. It was only later she realized this was the moment he saw an incredible opportunity. She stayed in his tower that night, and in the morning found herself locked in her room. Melkos came when he heard her banging on her door and told her he could not let her leave. This was a unique opportunity. Could she not see that? Their true automata development had stalled. It was going nowhere, but this could be the key. With her help, he could create the ultimate arcane automaton, giving it the entity's form, which the entity would then inhabit, creating a true mechanical golem. Basa was horrified, and in her mind, she could feel that the entity loved this idea. She protested, screamed for Melkos to not help this thing, demanded to be set free, demanded he destroy the book she brought him. It does not wish to be destroyed, he said. It demands to be created. Someday, someone will create it. It might as well be me. No. What are you talking about? No one should create it. Someone else wants to make a monster, so you should do it first? That's derangement. Well, you have done it first, Basa. I will just make it real. You will help me craft a mechanical body to match that beautiful shape in your mind. This will help you, Basa. It will be drawn from your mind to the physical form. It wants to be real. After whispering her story to Zidan, Basa held her head. He entrances me, makes me describe more of it to him every day. Let's make this the last day then, said Zidan. Basa told him when to expect Melkos to arrive the next day, and he hid behind the door. When Melkos entered, Zidan leapt on him from behind, knocking him to the floor. Basa jumped off the bed, holding the restraints once tied around her wrists, and bound the struggling Magus. They locked the room and searched the tower for the book she brought back, but could not find it. The letter to Aeneas, after recounting all this, ended thusly. We have escaped and are hiding nearby. We have written this letter in hopes that you are safe, and that it might illuminate what you have become involved with. If you are able to write us back, please do so. The automaton will return to us. Yours, Zidan and Basa. Aeneas wrote back hastily. You could not find the book, because I stole it. I stole it for Gelfarr. It was the first thing he had me do. And I've already finished drawing a long series of diagrams based on Basa's notes in it. I've only seen the one book, but I believe Gelfarr had Farah create diagrams for the other volume. We've been kept apart, but I believe I've seen her carrying it. He must have realized the danger of one person knowing the whole form after Basa ran away. The diagrams he had us create were for transformations of anatomical forms into the geometries described in the books. I've seen glimpses of the devices they're making. There are two being built separately into the same machine in Gelfarr's workshop. It's not what Melkos was attempting. They're not making the machine itself into the shape. It looks as though it will. The lock on her bedroom door clicked. Aeneas quickly collected what she had written and stuffed it into the automaton, closing its hatch and pushing it out the window, turning to face the door before she could see if it reactivated before shattering on the ground below. Gelfarr stepped into the room, flanked by lunar guards. The day has come, he said. It is time for you to see our glorious creation, my dear. It is complete. We'll conclude the story shortly, but first, back to the build. I put a thin layer of Mod Podge mixed with black paint on the big bot to seal in all the coffee grounds dirt and act as a kind of primer. Once that's dry, I take Aileen's tacky glue and stipple it onto the bot's chassis and panels. Aileen's tacky glue is a particularly thick brand of PVA glue, so as it dries, it'll more or less hold its shape, giving the piece a somewhat rough, pitted texture, which looks a bit like cast iron and gives it some more character. Next up, it's prime time. An airbrush helps get in all the hard-to-reach nooks and crannies. Spray paint works well too. I prime with black because there are a lot of dark recesses on the models, and they're going to get pretty dark and grimy paint jobs anyway. Of course, you can always just prime them by hand. It takes a little longer, but you don't need any special equipment, and there's no setting up and tearing down a spray booth, so that's nice. I'll start the colors on the big bot with the leaky meat. An undercoat of a reddish purple color will help give the impression of bruised flesh. And then I go for a deeper, bluer purple on the veins and crevices. As for the machine parts, these are going to be pretty banged up old bots, so there will be a lot of chipped paint and visible metal. So I base coat the rest with a dark metallic, just a mix of silver and black paint. And then some brown mixed with purple to base coat the dirt, and some flat flesh to create the impression of thin skin holding in the bulbous growth. It's also very viable to do this all by hand without an airbrush, which I did on the Nexuses. I want these to look old and worn, so we're going to do a chipped paint effect. Model paint companies make special chipping mediums just for this purpose, but I'm just going to use masking fluid you can get at any art supply store. You can use a cotton swab, toothpick, old brush, whatever you like to apply it. I try to put this on the parts of the model that would get the most wear. Generally, that'll be on prominent edges and parts that are lower to the ground, and more likely to scrape against things and lose bits of paint. So for cables, I just pick some fairly bright colors from my Vallejo set. I like to start bright, and I can muddy them up and tone them down later when I do washes and whatnot. The textured cables I leave metallic. For the actual bot liveries, I do a two-color scheme, using a few paints from Warcolours. This is their Warm Gray 1. It's kind of a bone color, so I think of this as kind of evoking a skull. It does need a few layers to really cover the dark metal. And I do a little panel lining and shadows with their Warm Gray 3. And then the other main color is Warcolours Antithesis Khaki, which is actually more of an olive. It just kind of makes sense for a tank. As I keep painting, you'll see me using some very thin masking tape from Tamiya to make nice clean stripes. But in the meantime, let's finish the story. Looming in the center of Gelfarr's great workshop, the ancient war machine. Dug up from some bygone era, its chassis gutted and filled with a pair of new devices, twin maws of cruel, gleaming metal. One of them, Aeneas knew, constructed from her designs. And there, standing on the other side of the war machine, was the other designer, Farah. Between them were the artificers, and surrounding them all were armed guards of the lunar faith. Farah was smiling, looking fawningly at Gelfarr, who released Aeneas's arm and stepped in front of the great machine. He looked at those gathered before him with a shining, beneficent smile. He spoke. "Behold our creation, a glorious instrument for the faith and for the kingdom. Standing before us is the means for creating a lunar angel, an angel of death. This powerful war machine, built by our forebears in the early cultures, shall roll again for the great Crusade. Today, we shall recreate in its hollowed chassis the spirit form unknowable of a great holy messenger who will crush the infidels and lead our crusaders to victory." As cheers rose in the hall, a voice cut through them. "It is no holy one. I have seen it. I see it always. I have it inside me," Basa shouted. Zidan stood beside her, white knuckle clutching a spear stolen from the armory. "Hear me," she continued. "It will not fight for you. It cares not for your war. Pious infidel, it matters not. It will destroy all. You may yet be right, Gelfarr. It may be an angel of death, but it will never be your angel." "Restrain them," Gelfarr barked to the guards. After a brief scuffle, they easily overpowered the interlopers, disarmed them, and brought them to Aeneas, penning the trio together. Gelfarr sneered. "You faithless dog." He spat at Basa. "You recoil at the form of holiness in your mind because you are a pathetic, filthy, unworthy vessel for its radiance. You are anathema to it, heretic. You have stood in the way of the angel's arrival in the mortal realm, and the angel will see you punished for it. No, the angel requires worthy vessels, faithful, pious, holy vessels to work through, to exalt as instruments of its divine wrath. Come, my darling. He held his hand out, and Farah took it, and they approached the war machine. Hand in hand, they let the artificers strap them into the devices inside. Oh gods, are they, stammered Zidan. It is, said Aeneas. It's sarcomancy, semiotic evisceration. It's excited, shivered Basa, clutching her head, not hearing them. I can feel it, straining for the moment. Now fully strapped in, blades and hooks pressing against skin, Gelfarr squeezed Farah's hand and called out. Angel of death, descend upon us as we take your form, as we give unto you a new and powerful body, wrought of our flesh, that you may wreak your vengeance upon the world. And with a click and whir, the spring-loaded devices inside the war machine lacerated and pulled apart their bodies, broke their bones, twisted them back and back again in gruesome contortions, forming a horrible sculpture of broken bone, stretched sinew, flayed skin, twisted organs, all too fast for them to even scream. Aeneas, Zidan, Basa, the guards, and the artificers, covered in blood, stood in stunned silence. Basa shuddered, held her head. And then the quivering flesh in the machine screamed. The flesh and bone and organs and blood, twisted and contorted, expanded and fused with the metal of the machine, the skin roiling violently as its form degenerated into an amorphous mass of meat, shaking in agony. Basa looked up, stammered, What? But that's not the shape, it's not. Aeneas took her hand in Zidan's and began pulling them back, away from the monstrosity. After Gelfarr brought me back to the tower, I still had weeks of work to complete, translating your notes into diagrams. I still didn't fully understand, not until your letter, but I knew enough to alter the diagrams, to make them look superficially correct, but deep down, fundamentally wrong. Let's go. Transfixed by the horror before them, no one noticed the three acolytes as they quietly backed away and out of the building. Once outside, they ran and never returned. Sarcomancy, or flesh magic, has a long and sordid history in Ozma. It had been centuries since the last monks had meticulously constructed their eviscerators and strapped themselves into them. Activating them, they would be torn apart, taking on holy forms of flesh, signs for the signified spirits to embody and use to exert their will on the mortal realm. The Crusade machine, the biomechanical beast sabotaged by Aeneas, trapped the entity that had tormented Basa in a malformed, painful body from which it could not escape. It lashed out in agony, killed those remaining in the workshop, broke through the walls, and tore down half the royal college before lumbering into the wilds, where it would locate and awaken with some long, quiet, early culture system, dormant machines from ages past that would serve it faithfully as it went mad from pain, hunting the one who tricked it into occupying this excruciating form. And that's the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's finish these guys. This part is quite satisfying, peeling off the tape. Not perfectly clean lines, but I can touch those up without too much trouble. Okay, so for the head, we rolled godlike. It's a really cool prompt. Lots of ways to go with that. And it definitely inspired a good portion of the story you just heard. There are so many depictions of gods, but for some reason my mind went to a letter, like a written character. It's called the multi-ocular O, which is whatever the character equivalent is of a hapax legomenon. A hapax legomenon is a word or phrase that appears only once in a given body of work. Anyway, the multiocular O isn't a word, it's a single character, a way of writing the letter O that appears once in a single 15th century text in Old Slavonic, in this phrase which I don't know how to pronounce, but which means many-eyed seraphim. And the letter O is written in this way to represent the many eyes of the seraphim, because angels aren't just guys with wings, they're much more alien and strange, with many, many wings and covered in eyes. Anyway, that got me thinking that a godlike head or face might just be completely covered in eyes. If it works for seraphim, why not a god? So these nodules all over the body are made from droplets of hot glue that have dribbled from my hot glue gun. I'm leaving a lot of them as nasty boils, but the ones in front are going to be eyes. And while I'm using this white paint, I want to put some more stripes on this guy. Quick detour. Using more of this really thin masking tape from Tamiya. For another little paint detail, I try sticking some masking tape to a piece of parchment paper and punch holes in it. Since the tape's on parchment paper, it won't stick to the hole punch, and I can easily peel it off to use as a stencil. And it works quite well. A few coats later, and we can pull these off. And those are some nice clean lines. Okay, back to the eyes. I add a little red wash around the edges to give them a bloodshot look. And then for some irises, just little dots of azure blue pointing in all different directions. You know, the face is getting kind of googly, and you could say it has a death body and kind of an evil flavor. And I guess you could say the arm, leg things dragging out the back are kind of going backwards. Oh, here's pupils, even littler black dots. Anyway, I guess what I'm saying is if you squint, maybe this guy actually fulfills both interpretations of my roles. I don't know. What do you think? Anyway, I add some little white dots as highlights, and that's our godlike face done. So I try a few different ways of removing the masking fluid, which is basically just latex, so be careful if you have an allergy. I start off with a craft knife, which is good for picking at it and catching it with the point, but obviously introduces a pretty high risk of scratching the paint, which means I have to work slowly and carefully. I can also use the backside of the blade with a scraping motion to kind of rub off the mask, but again, the hardness of the metal means it's quite easy to scratch the paint. I also give tweezers a try. Since they're steel, they have a similar hardness and paint scratching problem as the knife, but they're nice for gripping otherwise hard to grab bits of masking and peeling them off, which is, let me say, very satisfying. Oh, and we can pull these circle masks off along with some of the masking fluid around them, and those came out really nice. I should find some weird shaped hole punches. I also tried toothpick, which actually works pretty well. It's a bit harder to scratch the paint at least, and the relatively fine point is nice. And then some silver paint touch-ups and highlights for the exposed metal. Since the base metal is a silver and black mix, I just highlight with silver paint. And I add a little dry brushing here and there to help bring out some of the edges and details. The most success I had peeling off the masking fluid was probably with this color shaper, which is like a paintbrush but with a silicone wedge instead of bristles. Rubbing it on the pieces would usually catch the masking and pull it away from the model, and the silicone is very soft, so there's little risk of messing up the paint, unless you get too vigorous with it and hit the piece with the metal ferrule, which I may have done once or twice. In certain areas, I just paint in the metal, like on all the tiny rivets, which are so small they can get lost without a bit of contrast in the paint. I also tried cotton swab at one point, and it's okay. It's very low risk for scratching paint, but not super effective at picking up the masking fluid. Though in the future, I might try dipping a swab in masking fluid, letting it dry, and then use that. I think it'd probably pick up the mask really well. Now, there's a lot of dirt and scratches on these guys, which means all this pristine paint is going to need to get grimy to match. My favorite way to do that is with an oil wash. In this case, some brown and black oil paint, heavily diluted in mineral spirits. It's diluted so the pigment isn't overpowering, and so it's runny enough that it flows into cracks and recesses. You can do an acrylic wash instead, which is just acrylic paint diluted in water instead of oil paint diluted in mineral spirits. They both work great, but I prefer the oil wash because you can get some very rich colors out of it, and it has a much longer working time than acrylics. The oil wash takes a long time to dry, so you can manipulate it, sop some of it up, or wipe it off for quite a while after you apply it. You have to be much quicker with acrylics. But like I said, you can get great results with either. Now that everything's been darkened a bit with the wash, it's time to bring back a little brightness with some highlights. I'm pretty subtle with the highlights on these models, mostly just trying to catch exposed edges and picking out little details I'd like to draw more attention to. For the warm gray bone color, I just use the base warm gray and mix in a touch of white. And for the olive antithesis khaki, I actually highlight with goblin green, the remake of the classic GW paint by Warcolours. For most of this, I'm just painting thin lines on edges and along panels. I want the metallic textured cables to have a little more definition, so I thin down some black paint and put it in the crevices so each segment will be more distinct. And then I highlight the segments with some pure silver paint. The colored cables also get some little highlights where they're most prominent. A few last little odds and ends. These guys get dirt, that's coffee grounds again. The antenna guy gets coffee dirt too, which we'll paint brown. And the Nexus guys get bases, also with dirt. Then we lighten up the dirt for everyone, gradually building up drier and brighter layers, mixing in more and more tan and flat flesh. These guys could use some R2-D2 robot face lights, and cleaned up edges for their bases. Then it's time to varnish the pieces to protect them. This is very straightforward. I paint on a layer of gloss varnish to start, and when that's dry, I do a layer of matte varnish. I like AK Interactive's Ultra Matte, which creates a very nice, even matte finish. And then I go back and add little spots of gloss for effect. Like I make the eyes nice and wet looking and add streaks of tears running down the face. Should it be leaking? Okay, before we get to the beauty shots, I want to thank all the lovely people who made this possible by supporting my work. If you like what I'm doing here, consider becoming a member at my website, paradiso.zone, or here on YouTube. For the price of a cup of coffee or a beer or sandwich or something, you'll help me survive and keep making weird stuff. And you'll also get a bunch of that weird stuff as rewards. And if you enjoyed this video in particular, give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment, send it to your grandma if you think she'll like it. I don't know. Okay, anyway, here's the results. What a beautiful family. Another way you can support videos like this is by going to paradiso.works, which is my online store, where you can buy RPG stuff and some nice apparel. I don't know if anyone would be interested in buying some little tank guys, but I could make more of them and put them on there. Anyway, I really like how all these guys came out. They're very pleasantly chunky, and it was really fun getting to learn how to do some molding and casting and get into some new ways of making things. Thanks to Bill Making Stuff for making the Big Bot Bash, and all the folks that took part for inspiring this monstrosity. So, anyway, another really long video. I don't mean for these to be this long, but it just kinda happens. So, I hope you enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you watching it. Yeah, thanks for being here. All right.